Can we please bring in Wally Buono? I would go through the list of your accomplishments, Coach, but we only have 2 hours. I'll say the latest. Congratulations on going on the Wall of Honor in Calgary, Wally. Long overdue, man. What did you think when you got the news?
Well, you know what, Rob? Let me first of all say thank you for having me on your show, and then secondly, uh, the fact that it's been long overdue, that's my fault, not the Stampeders' fault. And so I'll just tell you the quick story is I was called years ago by the club to be put on the wall. And when I was coaching with the Lions and being the GM, I just didn't feel it was the right thing to do. So I kind of told the club that I could not accept the recognition. And I just couldn't stand at midfield and look at the Stampeders and then turn and look at the BC Lions and feel good about myself. So I just said to them, you know what, at this time, it's just not the right time for me. So, that's my fault. And in fairness to the Stampeders, this is the third time, and I did accept this time.
Well, I love it. Well, that's thanks for straightening that out. But, you just made me think about something. When you said turn around, all those years, East Side, Taylor Field. And by the way, Wally, I was in that crowd for years before I was in the booth. You never turned around, not one time. You were there hundreds of times. How did you not ever turn around, not one time?
Well, part of that is you don't want to get involved with the crowd. You know that, Rod. You're not going to win, and at the end of the day, you're going to embarrass your football club. The other thing, too, is about keeping focus. You can't be on the players about keeping focus if you yourself, as a coach or as a manager, can't keep yourself focused for 60 minutes. So, it was a lot of that. Did I ever want to turn around? Sure. But at the end of the day, probably was best served that I did.
I chalk it up to superior mental strength. And I'm not just kissing your butt, man. Kudos for not doing that. So Lori writes in from Toronto. She's an Argos fan, but she said her question for you was, so many coaches have said that you mentored them. She wants to know, who mentored you?
Well, you know what? I was very, very fortunate in my early years as a player to have, some of the great coaches. Marv Levy was that. He was our head coach. And, Marv was a very much kind of ownership kind of guy. He wanted the players to take ownership of the team. He wanted the players to hold each other accountable. He wanted the players to, understand what we were there for. And, Marv preached, we weren't there to play football. We were there to win football games. And he always felt, hey, you take care of me by winning games, and I'll take care of you by making sure you have a spot on the roster. So, Rod Russ was another great mentor. He was our defensive coordinator. Joe Galat was a mentor. So we were very fortunate in my early stages to have some really, really great coaches who really appreciated the game, but also appreciated the players. They understood that you win with players.
Yeah, well, I was telling the story earlier, the time that I interviewed you at the Hotel Saskatchewan. You were so gracious to spend some time. And I said, what was the secret to your success? If you remember, you said great players, which I'm sure you say every time that you get asked that question, right? It's you were never saying it was me. You passed along it to Shiv. And I should ask you, because I was going to ask you about you going into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. But when Shiv went in, what did you think about that?
Well, no, I mean, Roy Shivers, God bless him, when you look at wherever he's been, he's won. He was in BC in the early 80s, and they won a Grey Cup. The best thing that ever happened to me was when Larry Kuharich and Joe Cap didn't want Roy in BC in 1990, and I convinced Normie Kwan to bring him in even before I was hired because of the fact that when you looked at Roy's track record, he brought in tremendous players, and these were guys that could play football. And, Roy's philosophy and our philosophy was, hey, we're not going to deal with free agents. We're going to go out and find our own. And, Roy went out and, he was well connected at that time. And he brought in some great players. It would be amazing to find out how many players are in the Hall of Fame that Roy brought into the league.
You know what? We could find that real fast. Mark DeNoble, close friend of mine. He's not with the Hall anymore, but he would probably be able to rattle it off right like that. But, when Shiv came over to Sask, let's be honest, he brought Hank, he brought Eddie, he brought Alondra Johnson eventually. He brought a lot of guys, and you guys still ended up winning the Grey Cup in 01. Like, of all your Grey Cups, that must have felt good to survive that. Shiv did raid the Stamps, let's be honest, when he came over, right? How did you feel about that?
Well, no, I'm fine with all that. At the end of the day, it's all about open competition, and you compete not only on the football field, but you also compete in free agency and coaches and staff. And, if a player or a staff member can better themselves both career-wise and financially, why would you hold a grudge? Hey, life goes on. Eventually, you go find somebody else, and sometimes what you find is better than what you have. So, it was fine. And, at the end of the day, Roy had to be comfortable with the people that he wanted, and like all of us, we want to be surrounded with people that we know and we can trust.
That's one thing of the many that I respect about you is that grudge thing. Hopefully, Hank and Shiv get over theirs. When you talk about winning as a group, they don't have coordinators in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. They do in the States, as you know, and the NFL has an award for the Coordinator of the Year. Can you imagine if they ever did in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame? I would say George Cortez would be the first ballot inductee. They might want to name the award after George. Don't you think coordinators should get in there?
Well, you know what? Let me just tell you one thing. To get into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame today is difficult. I think if you add another category, it would make it even more difficult. So, I like the process the way it is. If you're deserving, people will recognize you and people will acknowledge what you've done. So, George Cortez was a great coach, but there's a lot of great coaches and that have their name not in the CFL Hall of Fame yet and probably never will because there are so many great candidates.
As you say, very hard to get in. We sit here with bated breath waiting this year's class, and I'm really hoping that Ray Yawk is on it because I was part of the nomination process for that. Trevor in Red Deer writes in with a loaded question, Wally, but I know you can handle it. Trevor in Red Deer wants to know. He says, I have a question for Wally. Who was the best quarterback you've coached in your career?
Well, you know what? We had a lot of great quarterbacks, and, I'll name some of them. Doug Flutie, Danny Barrett, Dave Dickinson, Jeff Garcia, Travis Lulay, Casey Prentice was good for a period of time, Buck Pierce. But at the end, Henry Burris. But you got to look at the guy who put up amazing stats was Doug Flutie. And the thing that I've always was impressed with is no matter where Doug went, they had a great team, they had a great offense, they had a great offensive line, and he won. And that's whether it was BC, Calgary, or Toronto. And even to a certain degree, I guess the Buffalo Bills. Doug was a tremendous quarterback, but also a great person. Okay, I can tell you a little story. One Sunday afternoon, we're in Calgary, and I'm going to meet with John Huffnagel, and I'm driving by, and guess who's on the street playing street hockey with the kids? Doug Flutie's playing street hockey with the neighborhood kids. So that's Doug, and I think that's not only why he was such a great quarterback, but also such a good person.
Really, really, really cool guy. Well, Wally, I'll say this. It's something that you would have coached in two places, and they just worship you in Calgary. For instance, Mark Steven comes on our show in Calgary all the time when we're there. And he goes, I'll tell you something about Wally. He's got a Hall of Fame career from the Stampeders and then a Hall of Fame career from the Lions. Two separate Hall of Fame careers. And Mark no, that's not a lot of guys can say that, Wally. So I'll say, don't mind me. The hedge guy's going by here in Florida. I'll just say,
that's okay.
Enjoy it. I hope to be there in July when you go on the wall because it's always fun to be there. The '98 celebration was a lot of fun. Was that just last summer? Yeah, it was. So kudos on the latest accomplishment, Wally, and I hope things are good with you.
Oh yeah, no, my life is good. We're in Arizona here till the middle of May, but the recognition by the Stampeders again is great, but it also makes you go back and start remembering all the people, like you said, like Shiv and Sugarfoot Anderson and a whole bunch of other people that were involved. And success is never an individual person. It's got to be a collective whole. Like your show, you might have a pretty face and you might do a good job, but behind the scenes there's a lot of work going on that nobody ever sees that helps you to be successful. So success has to be appreciated, but it's always a team effort too.
Of course, always giving them credit. And then someday I'll bring you back. It feels like you might have time to tell some stories. When Shiv said we were going to go to Calgary and break Henry's neck. Remember that? You were gone. That was 05. Oh, my God. It was front page news. I can't imagine how they would deal with that in the CFL. That was a scandal back then, which really wasn't that big of a scandal. But that was Roy. Wally, thanks for this. Enjoy the time, man. I'll see you this summer.
Okay, appreciate it, Rob. Thanks again for having us on your show.
The man, the greatest of them all, Wally Buono, checking in from Arizona on the latest great accolade in his Hall of Fame career.